Hi, welcome to the second episode of the Pharmacy Lounge podcast. Today we'll be discussing law and ethics with Paul Summerfield. The idea of today's podcast is to basically go through some of the questions that are more frequently asked. We want to cover topics such as the recent GPhC statement on profiteering. Another key topic we want to discuss is the CMAs, around CMA and cartel behaviour. I know a lot of pharmacists love to discuss rates. We talk about rates day in day out on the Locum groups, but there are some things that we should be aware of as pharmacists, as Locums, and this is the key topic that we want to explore today. And just to clarify, today is an advisory. Everything that we say, everything that we're discussing is advisory. If you want full detailed advice, you should speak to a solicitor, a lawyer, or your insurance provider. Today we're just exploring the questions that a lot of locums ask, the situations that we face, and it's purely our opinion, not statements or facts that you can use to take up with the company, but these are things that we really should be questioning ourselves as pharmacists, as healthcare professionals, and hopefully we can come to some understanding. And if you have any questions, please do leave your comments on either on YouTube, or you can feel free to ask us on the Telegram network, on the Pharmacy Lounge groups. So on to our guest, Paul Summerfield, who was qualified back in 1997, and has a lot of experience as a locum, as a pharmacy legal expert. So, on to Paul.
For those who are listening, remember that what we're talking about is for guidance only. It shouldn't be construed as legal advice. If you do need legal advice, I would strongly recommend that you contact your insurer, a solicitor, or the Citizens Advice Bureau. Okay? Right, Total. On with the questions.
Thanks, Paul, and thanks for being here today. In effect, you've been a pharmacist for a long time, and you're also advisory board on the a member of the MEP advisory board. So you're quite familiar with the pharmacy law and ethics, and generally as a pharmacist, you do come across obviously a lot of interesting cases. So, since you qualified in 97, I just wanted to try to get an understanding from your end. How has pharmacy changed? Do you see a lot more litigations? Do you see people, being pulled in front of the GPhC a lot more frequently than before?
Right. Well, again, it's changed an awful lot since 97. When I first qualified, it was, it wasn't great, but it was good.
Mm-hmm.
What I found personally, and again, I have to reiterate, this is a personal experience, is that pharmacy has changed an awful lot. When I first came in, standard operating procedures were hardly heard of.
Mm-hmm.
And certainly hardly any pharmacies had them. Of course, this all changed. RPSGB, as it was, the Royal Pharmaceutical Society of Great Britain, as it was, you heard of the cases that were coming in front of them, but you really sort of thought, oh, that's never going to be me. And however, come the GPhC in 2010, and notice that things started to change. A lot more pharmacists and registrants being called up in front of the committee. There is at any one point quite a few pharmacists and registrants who are actively in cases. The old adage of when you were at university, which is if you were sitting in a lecture hall, used to be said, look to your left, look to your right. One of you at some point will be in front of the regulator.
Yeah.
That used to really scare a lot of people. The GPhC were very keen to show their teeth at first instance, and quite, rightly so in their opinion, because they were a new regulator. However, I've seen a change over the last couple of years. They've become very pragmatic in their approach. and they have certainly become a regulator who is starting to show that they can listen and that they do listen to the registrants when they are in front of a fitness to practice panel, or if there's indeed a fitness to practice investigation. They do listen, and there's been some very good results as of late, where investigations have been started and they've ran the course, and because of the circumstances of the registrant, they haven't appeared in front of the fitness to practice committee. So, they have changed, but the general perception is that the GPhC are out to get people. That's not the case. I'm not a member of the GPhC, I don't work for the GPhC, but I know from dealing with cases, it's certainly not the case that they're out to get you.
I think that's a general perception. Whenever you talk to pharmacists, it's like, oh no, the GPhC, they're gonna call me out in front of their fitness and practice committee, and I'm gonna get into trouble, blah blah blah. I'm like, if you've not done anything wrong, then you shouldn't have to worry. And I think one thing pharmacists really need to focus on is the law and ethics. I mean, if you look at some of the questions out there that are being asked on the Pharmacy Lounge, on Telegram, and on the clinical support groups on Telegram, you kind of makes you think, have you guys actually studied the MEP like you're supposed to? Once you qualify, that will help you a lot. But it's just, I don't think anyone ever looks at the MEP apart from needing to pass the exam. So I mean, it is good to know. Look, like when I qualified, everyone was literally scared of the it was then the RPSGP back in 2005, and even the GPhC. Anything going on, the first thing that comes is like, we're gonna have to call the GPhC about this. I'm like, oh, please don't do that. I'll do anything. But what we've seen over the recent years, and what I've personally seen over the recent years, and being in the position where I've seen so many pharmacists ask me so many different questions, and looking at some of the FTP cases that have come up and the stuff that have come up on the news, I'm starting to wonder whether pharmacists are actually more worried, and because they're worried about the GPhC, they will do things that they're not supposed to even have to do. For example, when I see one thing I see a lot is pharmacists being threatened when cancelling shifts. Now, a company will cancel shifts.
You've mentioned that now, so I think that would be a very good thing to cover now, instead of saying, oh, we'll cover that later on. Okay. So I know this may seem a little bit disjointed, so I apologise to anybody who thinks it is disjointed. It may seem, but I think we'll cover that now. In relation to cancelling shifts, once you've got a shift booked, that's it. It's booked. Okay. Yeah. You need to refer back to your contract, either with, if you're a direct locum, like I am myself, refer to the contract that you've got directly with the company. If not, refer to the agency that you've booked through and find out what their cancellation policy is. Now, the National Pharmacy Association, NPA, their standard terms are 72 hours by either side. Okay? Not great when you think about how it's been with the pharmacists being on the register and being numerous on the register as well. PDA, Pharmaceutical Defence Association, have taken a very, very pragmatic approach and said, well, really, it should be longer. It should be 14 days, 28 days, I've heard banded around. And I think that would be a really good way
being the devil's advocate on this one, what if I have a pharmacy and a locum cancels on me, say 3 days before, and it's a busy period? What are my rights?
Well, basically, again, you need to refer back to any locum cancellation policy. Everybody should have a cancellation policy, to be honest. Not to sound sexist here, but a gentleman's agreement is no longer acceptable. It's no longer good enough.
But in reality, sorry,
you carry on.
Sorry. So I was saying, but in reality, a lot of the independents and smaller companies, they don't have a contract. I've only seen multiples throw around their contract, and they seem to be changing whenever they feel like. We've gone from giving 7 days notice with some of the companies to saying, well, we can cancel on that day technically, and we can ask you to travel up to 50 miles away, and if you're not happy with it, we just won't pay you for it, because that to us shows that we try to give you alternative booking. So I think that's something that locums face very frequently these days, and it's one I've faced a few times as well.
Of course, and that is annoying, and it can be very frustrating as well. But if you've signed up to that contract, if you've signed a locum agreement, then you're bound by it. Unfortunately, that's the way it is. Yes, you have to have a look at if has there been bad faith in there, and when you're looking at it, to travel 50 miles to be cancelled and then be told, oh, you can claim for that 50 miles, and we'll give you maybe 2 or 3 hours pay or half pay to compensate, doesn't compensate you for the loss that you've incurred. So from a pure technical point of view, you could actually bring an action for the difference in the amount. That is entirely you, but you would need to refer back to the agreement that you've signed to. Now, going back to what you said about a lot of independents don't have a locum cancellation policy, then what a court would be looking at is, well, what's the standard, what's the industry norm for that? And everyone's going to, of course, point to the NPA contract. So if a locum cancels on you in 72 hours, most of the times the contract will say you have to find us a replacement, and if you don't, and we are out of pocket because of that, as in you have to find a locum who, say, charges twice the amount, and in the circumstances that would be acceptable. It may not be acceptable. Again, that's between the locum and the contractor to decide what is acceptable. They may turn and say, you owe us the difference because you cancelled on us short notice. Again, you would have to look at what the industry norm would be in order to try and find out if that was acceptable, and then argue fine points, and hopefully come to an arrangement and an agreement between yourself and that contractor. And if it can't, then unfortunately it may escalate and it may be heard in front of a judge. We don't know. Again, we're looking at hypothetical situations. That is my understanding of what would happen. And again, this is advice only. So if you were in that position, certainly I would be saying get in contact with a solicitor, get in contact with Citizens Advice Bureau if you can't afford a solicitor, and get some legal advice on the position that you're in before you would lodge proceedings either side, contractor to locum or locum to contractor. Hopefully that answers your question.
Yeah, I think that does. I think there'll be a lot more questions coming up from locums within the group, but I think it's a good start. And we need to start, I think, creating some kind of resource for locums to look at for examples of how they can deal with these kind of issues, because like I constantly get messages about, oh, I've just been cancelled, what's my rights, what can I do? Usually if it's it's from a large company, and they will cancel with 4 days notice. So this is where it gets difficult, and I think recently one of the large multiples sent out a memo saying it was an internal memo to say they need to cancel all the locums because of the whole COVID situation. They need to use their own internal pharmacist, and that caused obviously a lot of anxiety, and a lot of locums had their shifts cancelled in very short notice. So I think there is a lot of there'll be a lot more questions around this topic. So we'll keep it for the lounge later on. So moving on to our next question about the remote RP stuff. Again, there was a statement by the GPhC about remote RP being allowed in the very small, certain, or very how shall I put this? So the GPhC, I think the estimate was that if a pharmacist is unable to carry on with the day's work or has to go off, then they can someone else can be a remote pharmacist if they couldn't find another pharmacist. But again, we've seen some companies are sending out messages: if you can't cover this rate shift at this rate, we'll use remote RP. We've heard incidences about from other pharmacists as well, where companies are using remote RPs across Scotland and England. Again, could you clarify exactly what the GPhC statement actually was and what companies can and can't do with that statement?
Of course, again, this is my take on this, and it's my understanding. Now, when the GPhC released the guidance in relation to if a pharmacist had to, for want of a better phrase, limp off the field halfway through, it has to be taken as that. They released that statement regarding the potential of using a remote responsible pharmacist in very specific, very defined circumstances. They then issued a letter on the 27th of March of this year to all of the contractors to say, we've been made aware of instances where we believe that the guidance has been misinterpreted. So when you read that letter, and that's freely available for all to read on the GPhC website, what you have to do is you have to read the document as a whole. It's pointless reading specific paragraphs, then honing in on specific paragraphs or specific sentences to back up the argument of having a remote RP. Let's be clear, the GPhC have said, if you operate a pharmacy without a pharmacist, a responsible pharmacist, it is illegal. It is breaching the Medicines Act. It is breaching the law. However, we will tolerate that if it's in the patient's best interests under specific circumstances. And from reading the document as a whole, it is clear what the GPhC had in mind. They had in mind the fact that a pharmacist has to leave the premises midway through a shift, and that another pharmacist, and they have said a locum pharmacist, but it could be another pharmacist, cannot be found. What they did not say is that it is fine to operate a pharmacy at the beginning of the day without a responsible pharmacist being on the premises. That is what they are. They are not saying that. They are saying you need a responsible pharmacist still. We will tolerate minor breaches, and it is in very specific circumstances, and it is not to become the norm. It is not to become the normal way of practice. We are only allowing you to do this in this situation, in this pandemic. Once this pandemic is over, we will be going back to how it was and how it should be at all times. You must have a pharmacist on the premises acting as a responsible pharmacist from the beginning of the day. Anything else is not allowed. That is what the GPhC are saying. Just to reiterate, it's pointless honing in on specific paragraphs to back up the argument. Oh, but now it says if a locum cannot be found. It clearly states in the paragraph of the guidance if a locum pharmacist cannot be found. So, yes, it states that in a separate paragraph. However, you've got to read the paragraph before, and the one before that, and the ones after that to get the full gist of the document. You know, it's pointless honing in on specific paragraphs and specific sentences, as I've already mentioned.
Yeah.
You know, yes, that is what lawyers do day in, day out, don't get me wrong.
Yeah.
But in order for that document, that letter on the 27th of March to be given full understanding, the full thing needs to be read to give it context.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think
context.
I think the other issue is obviously that there are companies that operate in a way where they have pharmacists come in at 9 o'clock, but there has to be signed in at 7 o'clock. So everything that's been done beforehand can be signed off by a pharmacist. So I've been asked by one company where we finished at 7 o'clock. I think it was 6 o'clock we finished, and the manager asked if I could stay on, signed on till 8 o'clock, so they can stay back and finish off the stuff. So I said, look, I'm not responsible. I'm not here. This isn't. If this is something that's been done normally, it shouldn't be done normally, because that is not what that's not in the spirit of what the GPhC statement was, allowing pharmacists to be out of premises for 2 hours. Paul, on to our next question about the GPhC. This is one that comes up quite a lot about the cartel behavior or alleged cartel behavior by some locums. I think this is something I want to clarify to my colleagues on the social media about talking about rates openly, what they can and can't talk about. I know I can understand the frustration of pharmacists seeing their wages go down year on year, but ultimately we are individual businesses. We may not seem like that. We may, as healthcare professionals, we think, well, we go to the pharmacy, we go to work every day, and not everyone's fully aware of the intricacies of the law when it comes to setting up companies and your employment rights and what all that entails. Obviously, one of the benefits and one of the reasons why locums become locums is because it gives flexibility of work, and obviously you can do your own taxes, has its own benefits, but there are pitfalls as well. And there are things that you can talk about, and there are things you can't talk about. And one of them being your race and what you can say about them. But I know we can talk about historical rates, and we've developed a full market insight data review site for this, where they can see the historic rates, they can see the average rates around the country. Tell us a bit more about, as a lawyer, a solicitor, and obviously with it being a pharmacist and locum yourself, what's your take on this, and what should and shouldn't pharmacists, locums, talk about online or even with other colleagues?
Okay, yeah, just to clarify there, you mentioned lawyer, which is fine. I can classify myself as lawyer, but you also said as solicitor. Just to clarify, I'm not a solicitor. I certainly don't have any registration with the Solicitors Regulation Authority or the Law Society, just to clarify that point there. Okay, so basically, the Competition and Markets Authority, the CMA, are very, very hot at the moment on cartel behaviour and have done so for quite some time. What you've got to think about is, what is a cartel? And it is basically two or more companies, be that individuals or corporates, acting together to try and control the market. Now, very importantly, and on the discussion groups in Telegram, some individuals do breach this behaviour in price fixing by saying, do not accept less than. Okay, now that's actually is price fixing. So it's agreeing with competitors what price you will charge to avoid having to compete with each other. Okay, that is not allowed. So yes, you see some fantastic rates on these locum groups, on these locum boards. Absolutely fantastic rates. And yeah, hats off to the people who are getting them. Great. But what you can't do is you can't turn around and say, everybody charge £50 an hour. Everybody charge £50 an hour. There was a suggestion that Pharmacist Cooperative set up a locum agency with a minimum hourly rate. Yes, it was a suggestion, but guess what? That's cartel behaviour. You cannot do it. What also you cannot do is you cannot collude with another person or persons or companies in order to create bid rigging. So you say, we're not going to bid below X pounds per hour. Yes, almost very, very similar to price fixing. But again, you can't do it. That is cartel behaviour, and it is not allowed. And believe me, the CMA will come down hard on any individuals, be it as a sole trader or as a company, who basically indulge themselves in this behaviour. If you look on the CMA website, there are there are cases where two individuals have got together to fix prices. They find, I mean, you're talking tens, if not hundreds of thousands of pounds in fines because of their behaviour. So really, you've got to be very careful. And what I would say is, yes, you're fine to discuss historic rates. Don't get me wrong. And yes, it may seem that some people are bragging. Look at what I got. Look at what I got. But you can't discuss setting rate.
What we need to focus on as pharmacists is not just the rates that we're on, but also the quality of service that we provide as healthcare professionals. And I'm confident once we start providing more service, once we look at new ways to bring in better revenue for our employers, things will improve. And I think as businesses, as individual businesses, we need to start using data, the market data, which every big business uses these days. Data is king. If you know what the average market rates are, then you're in a better position to negotiate. If you know what's in demand and your skills in demand, then you're in a better position to negotiate. I think we need to be smarter overall in how we negotiate with our clients. And how we put ourselves forward as healthcare professionals. So,
of course, and and just a sort of brief comment on that. And again, this is not saying we should all get together to set rates, etc. But what we should be doing is we should all be working together as a profession in order to benefit the people who we signed up for, which are to benefit the public and to put patients and the public at the top of what we do. For far too long, pharmacists have been fighting, we've been squabbling amongst ourselves, fighting amongst ourselves. We really just need to join together. A good way of doing that is joining the PDA, join the Pharmacist Cooperative, bringing everybody together for a common purpose, and that common purpose is to try and serve the public, which is why we were hopefully signed up for in the first place when we did our degree.
Absolutely.
No matter what sector you're in, the patient is the top of the tree, and everything we do is to benefit that patient.
So, Paul, going to the question of the GPhC, they recently released a statement about profiteering, and it was obviously aimed at both the contractors and the pharmacists themselves. There's been a small minority of pharmacists that have been profiteering, and we've seen the case of a £20 box of paracetamol. But this statement has been taken out of context and has been used by companies to use as a beating stick for locums when they try to negotiate a fair rate. Tell us a bit more about this statement itself, what it covers, and how locums should be dealing with it when companies tell them they'll be reported to the GPhC for trying to negotiate a fair rate.
Okay, thank you. So basically, the very valid starting point would be for any pharmacist to look at the PDA position statement on the GPhC profiteering statement that was made. Very robust response. It sets out very, very well what would be expected from a negotiation. Now, the negotiation itself is between the contractor and the supplier of the service. So in this case, it would be the locum and either directly with the contractor or it would be through a locum agency. And an hourly rate, that is set, relies on a number of different things. And again, that's personal. It would be foolish to turn around and say, these are the things it is relied upon. For example, just in general, it could be the business of the pharmacy, prescription volume, counter queries, etc. How far it is away from that locum's place of residence. So, that's just two examples, but there could be many, many more. When you look at the GPhC and their remit is threefold. It is to protect the public, to maintain public confidence in the profession, but also to declare and uphold and maintain proper standards within the profession. Now, let's look at this profiteering statement regarding locum rates. The GPhC, in my opinion, have no right at all to say to a locum that rate is too high. And the reason for this is because they don't know what is being in that negotiation. I don't know. You don't know. The only person who knows is that locum contract, that locum provider of services, and the contractor. It's a business transaction. Okay, and this reminds me of the case of Jenkins back from October 1920, where it was held that the old Royal Pharmaceutical Society, as it was then, had no right to say to a contractor what they could and could not do if it was outside the remit or the powers of the society. And I'm just having a look at the case now, so my gaze is glancing over. And basically, it was held at regulation of hours of business members, wages, prices, the expenditure of the funds of the society, and the insurance of members against general insurance risk. The society couldn't regulate that. Okay, they just couldn't regulate it. You could say that by trying to regulate a rate, an hourly rate between a locum and a contractor is outside of the remit of the GPhC. Yes, that would be a valid argument. However, the argument coming back would be, hold on, you're supposed to act professionally at all times, standard 6 of the standards. So you can see the argument, but I fail to see now how a successful prosecution would be brought by the GPhC, i.e. hold locum or pharmacist in front of a fitness to practice committee for setting a locum rate. They would have to do a number of different things. They would have to show a number of different things in order to show that it was profiteering. So
yeah,
really,
I think that.
I think it would be on a very sticky wicket, to be honest.
Which makes it makes sense because obviously GPhC it's not in the remit to be looking at private contracts. Recently, obviously, we had one agency which was bragging about about reporting 6 pharmacists to the GPhC, and they worked along another very large company. So this is what, as pharmacists, this is the kind of pressure that we're facing, and this is how it's being abused, the GPhC statement. And I think this is something that we need to clarify as well, that companies should not be working together to threaten pharmacists, which is inevitably to control the market rates, because that they then fall foul of the whole anti-competition law. What's your take on that one?
Right. So basically, if a pharmacist has been threatened with reporting to the GPhC because of, let's say, profiteering, and what we need to do in that case is to turn around and say to that pharmacist, well, it has to be shown that you have profiteered from this. So basically, if a pharmacist is threatened with reporting to the GPhC regarding profiteering, what the GPhC would have to show is that they have profiteered. Again, to go back to what I said before, I think the GPhC, in my opinion, would be on a very sticky wicket. Number of things that they would have to prove, and remember, it's for the GPhC to prove the profiteering, not for you to disprove what the GPhC are saying. They have to prove it. So there's a number of different things, and certainly I'd be questioning whether or not it would be appropriate to continue your relationship with somebody who's actually threatened you, the regulator, and threatening somebody with the regulator as well. I mean, that's a fairly big move.
Absolutely.
Somebody to do, and it is being used as a beating stick. It shouldn't put people off trying to negotiate. The negotiation is private between you and the contractor, or you in the locum agency.
Mhm.
It's
Well, I
private.
think it's used quite frequently by a lot of companies now. I mean, I've seen so many emails from pretty much from the largest companies across the board are using this same excuse to threaten pharmacists that you're profiteering for asking for rates that were literally, in one case, I've seen two pharmacists. One was asking for 35, and the agency said you're profiteering. And on the very same day, another pharmacist was sent another email uh, offering 35. So even this whole thing about profiteering, it seems to be like used as and when required by the agencies and companies, certain companies, uh, as a more of a tactic to control rates rather than genuinely being concerned that they're profiteering. I mean, they're asking for £100, £150, £200 an hour. These are essentially rates that they were happily accepting before the pandemic. So I think this is the whole thing has been taken out of context and abused, and just it's another beating stick for companies to use against pharmacists. So I want to want to try and keep this whole thing short. I know we're kind of going way over our time that we're supposed to be. So on to our final question, and that's about the importance of insurance. We've heard recently some pharmacists who were saying, "Oh, we don't really need insurance. Our employers have got us covered." And there were cases of, and certain locums were saying, "Oh, we don't really need insurance. I've never had to use it." It's a bit of a, I think it's a bit of a wild one, that one. I would never see myself being working without an indemnity insurance. I mean, you'd never know when something could go wrong and whenever you could need it. I mean, what's your take on this? I mean, you've been in the game for a long time.
Unfortunately, yes. Or fortunately, yes, depending on how you look at it. But thanks for reminding me of that.
Fortunately.
Anyway, in relation to insurance, it's a professional requirement that you have to have insurance. Now, what they don't say is where that insurance comes from, whether it's provided by the company or the organisation you're working for, whether it's your own private indemnity insurance or whether it's a mixture of the both. One thing you've got to remember, though, is that having your own insurance is a complete safeguard against anything that would go wrong. Okay, now there are a number of different insurers out there offering different prices. It's worthwhile going and reading the small print to see what you are and are not covered for. And I don't want to mention any names because I don't want to be seen as directing people one way or the other, or the other way. But there are a number of different insurers out there. Now, the GPhC have made it quite clear in a number of cases where it has been alleged, and quite rightly, that a pharmacist has practiced without indemnity insurance, that the reason for having indemnity insurance is that it's there in case something goes wrong. Okay, and the public can have, or the patient, can have a recourse if something did go wrong. And the GPhC do view practicing without insurance quite seriously. If you are practicing without insurance and the GPhC catch up with you, there will be trouble. I'm not going to sugarcoat it. There will be trouble and you will be in trouble. Okay. But normally, if you're acting inside your professional boundaries, or also known as your sphere of competence, a lot of the contractors' insurance will cover you as a locum, but it's always worthwhile checking. Where it's handy is if you're an employee and there becomes an employment dispute. Hopefully your insurance will cover you for that, and you'll be able to get representation which is outside of the company you're working for, so there'll be no vested interests being possibly at play. So certainly that's worthwhile. It is worthwhile when there's an employment dispute. The GPhC, of course, wouldn't be overly concerned with employment disputes unless they involve some form of behaviour which breached the standards, and then they would become concerned. But it is worthwhile getting insurance for that, and for that alone if you're employed. If not, get insurance. Speak to the companies out there. Find out what's the best deal for you. But I'd always say, whatever insurance you go for, read the small print. You need to find out what you're going to be covered for, but potentially what you're not going to be covered for. A lot of times, and a lot of cases that I deal with, it's insurers who have refused to cover the individual because of an act they've done which falls outside the scope of the insurance. So it's worthwhile checking it out.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Look, I think that covers everything that we wanted to ask for today. And again, thanks for your time. You've provided a lot of insight on these areas, and I think these are questions that a lot of pharmacists had. When I certainly get a lot of these questions being asked regularly. Hopefully, it will get people thinking now and taking things a bit more seriously. So thanks again. Thank you for your time. I know you have a lot to do. So thanks.
No, that's fine.
So that was Paul Summerfield. You heard the full discussion there about all the key topics around pharmacy and what we're currently facing. I just want to end it with a final piece that, as pharmacists, as healthcare professionals, and as locums who are individual businesses, we do need to do a lot more research in these around these topics that we discussed today. Again, we like to talk a lot about the rates, and it's a contentious issue, something that's constantly been talked about for the last few years that we've had these online groups. And I can understand why people are so passionate about us. Being a locum myself, I've seen how our wages have gone down year on year. But there are certain rules in the market that are in place that we need to respect. When a company doesn't give us a shift, or when a company doesn't want to speak to us or give us any shifts at all or respond to our messages, we need to accept as this is the way the market is. Just move on. If a company threatens you, that's not really a company that you want to be working for. And we've seen a lot of emails around companies that have threatened locums for trying to negotiate. Move on. You don't need to work for a company that uses threats against you. If someone's threatening you, they have no respect for you. Simple as that. When an agency says, if you're negotiating what would be considered normal rates in most times, and even in current climate, and they use that as a beating stick, as a negotiation tactic, then you need to stay away from that agency. There are plenty of the agencies out there. There's a lot of work out there. Shifts need to be covered. So have a think about what we've discussed today, and see what your views are and what you find from your own research. And we're happy to discuss this on the lounge, or even, like I said, on the YouTube comment section. Just let us know your thoughts, and we'll see you on the next one.